Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer in South Carolina. But look, I ain't going to get up here and say that it's all fixed and we're going to see this team make a run to the college football playoffs because, look, I think there's still a lot of things that South Carolina needs to clean up. But I will say this felt a little bit different with that win against Kentucky. Especially when you consider the fact that South Carolina's played horrible in the month of September. They were 2-2 heading into this game. There were a lot of South Carolina fans, and I'll throw myself into this category that expected them to be undefeated going into the bye week. They weren't playing very good football, nothing close to what we expected from this team. And then they go down 7-0 right off the bat. There is a lot of other college football programs across the country where this thing snowballs and it just goes in the wrong direction. And you saw this football team battle back. And I'll say this, what we saw late Saturday night at South Carolina kind of reminded you of the South Carolina that we saw in the back half of 2024. Defense was creating a lot of negative plays. Defense was creating a lot of turnovers. LaNorris Sellers, that was the freest, if that's a word, the most free that we've seen LaNorris Sellers play all year long. He said, hey, I'm the best football player on the field, and I'm going to act like I'm the best football player on the field. Made a ton of plays for the South Carolina offense. And again, it wasn't perfect, but it felt a little bit different. And I just hear me out for 1 second. We're going into a bye week. We got plenty to clean up. We're still a banged up football team, so we got to get healthy over the next 2 weeks. We got to clean some things up over the next 2 weeks. We go on the road and play LSU. Am I picking South Carolina to go on the road and beat LSU right now? No, probably not. But I'll say this, I don't mind the matchup for South Carolina. You're going on the road to an LSU team that can't run the football worth a damn. Really can't move the football, period, on offense worth a damn. I'm looking at South Carolina and say, hey, if you can't run the football in South Carolina, and LSU's going to have to drop back and throw the football 40 times in this game against Dylan Stewart, against a guy like Brian Thomas, that's going to be a tough ask for this LSU offense. And then you get the bye week to prepare for an LSU defense that I think is really good. That is an intriguing matchup for South Carolina. And you go on the road and beat LSU and you improve to 4-2. Then you get Oklahoma. And Oklahoma's probably not going to have John Mateer in that football game. What happens if South Carolina goes on the road and beats LSU and then beats Oklahoma on October 18th? Again, I'm not going to get up here and say that South Carolina is going to make a run of the college football playoffs because, again, this team needs to get better before we start having that conversation. But we've seen historically, this is not vibes, this is facts. Shane Beamer teams get better as the season goes on. Can that be South Carolina in 2025? We'll see. Here's the special part about South Carolina is, look, this team ain't the best team in the country, right? There are certainly some flaws. But when you have a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers, you have an edge rusher like Dylan Stewart, you have guys that have the ability to make plays that can win you football games against anybody in the country. And if there's one thing we've learned in the SEC so far, there's not a team that's unbeatable. That's just simply a fact. And when you have guys, the special guys that South Carolina has, we'll see. And we saw some really good things from South Carolina Saturday night. Now, I want to get into the good. I also want to talk about the bad. In fact, talking about the bad is probably more of an important conversation because that's the stuff that needs to get cleaned up. And if they can clean up some of this stuff, they're going to be a dangerous team in October and November. Ain't no question about it. All right, before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the South Carolina fans. Man, it just feels good to be talking about this team winning football games and getting closer to the form that we expected from them when we were talking about this team in August. And the amount of support that the South Carolina fans have shown the boys, whether we're talking the positives, whether we're talking the negatives, been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, was it perfect on offense? No. And let's start off with the one really good thing that we saw. South Carolina didn't take a ton of negative plays. I believe he gave up 2 TFLs, think he gave up 3 sacks. It's not great, but it's not as bad as it's been for South Carolina. And in return, you were 8 of 15 on third downs. You were on schedule a decent amount on the offensive side of the football. That playbook was a little bit more open for South Carolina. It's one of the things that South Carolina has really struggled with. Look, they can be explosive. They can go 50-yard plays and score touchdowns. This is one of the most explosive offenses that you see, especially when you have a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers. What has really plagued South Carolina, even going back to 2024, it's just negative plays, get behind the chains. South Carolina did a good job staying on schedule. Now, the biggest storyline to me is just what we saw from LaNorris Sellers saying, hey, I'm going to go be the difference maker that we all know LaNorris Sellers can be. Because I think it's fair to say that at times in 2025, he's just been a little bit passive in terms of his playmaking ability. He is that's probably the best way to say, a little bit hesitant to just go be an athlete, to go be a playmaker. And look, as good as I think LaNorris Sellers is as a thrower of the football, I don't think he gets nearly enough credit for the steps that he has taken as a pocket passer. The best asset to your game is still what you are as an athlete. And you have to tap into that if you want to maximize what you can be as a football player more than any time this year. That's what we saw from LaNorris Sellers, because it wasn't perfect. And we'll talk about the offensive line next. I still think it needs to be cleaned up. You saw LaNorris Sellers cover for that offensive line and go make plays when he needed to make plays. Now, the offensive line, hey, let me start with this. Best performance at the tackle position we've seen all year. Tree Babalede, he is taking steps, man. Thought this was maybe the best play that we've seen from Tree Babalede in his career at South Carolina. Thought you saw some good things from Rodney Newsom, who has, in my opinion, not been all that good for South Carolina throughout 2025. Thought he was pretty damn good last night against Kentucky, or I should say Saturday night against Kentucky at the center position. My biggest issue with the offensive line is you still see those really bad mistakes where we're blowing some protections, we're getting beat clean. You just have to avoid those real lows, because you saw some good. I mean, Trevon Ball, when Trevon Ball is playing good ball and he wants to fire off the line of scrimmage and go move some bodies, he can impose his will at times. But you also see some really bad stuff. You see some blown blitz pickups that needs to get cleaned up, because you look at the two next games you have, two most important games on the South Carolina schedule as we sit right now. LSU on the road. Look, Blake Baker going to dial it up and going to give you a lot of different looks, and he is going to bring pressure. You have to take steps picking up those blitz packages. You're going to see the same thing from Brent Venables in Oklahoma. And so I'm looking at it and saying, hey, it's kind of the storyline we've talked about throughout 2025 is, individually, there have been some good performances for South Carolina on the offensive line, but it's never come together. It always feels like on each particular play, there's an offensive lineman not doing his job. We got to get this, number one, you got to figure out your best five. We're just moving so many bodies around. There's a new starting center seemingly every week. We're bouncing around tackles. We got to find and I know injuries have played a role, but we got to find our best five, and we got to rock with our best five the rest of the season, because it's really hard to be a consistent good unit when you have guys going from center to guard. You're moving guys around all over the offensive line. The more continuity you get, if you can find that starting five and really let them come together as a unit, I think that's going to help this offensive line. But we got to become more consistent, because you see the reasons people are optimistic about this offensive line. There is some individual talent on this group, but we're not really playing together consistently the way we ought to be playing. We'll see if we can fix it. And look, again, you got a true freshman at guard and Shed Surratt, who, again, he's probably the epitome of it. You see some really good things from Shed. He's going to be a good football player for South Carolina, but you also see some true freshman mistakes. You can say the exact same thing for a guy like Trevon Ball, who I know is not a freshman. You see some good things. You also don't see enough. Josiah Thompson's been more inconsistent than you would have expected in year two. Can we find that level of consistency? Is the storyline for this unit. Vandrevius Jacobs at the wide receiver spot, man, he just finding space, sitting down in zone coverage, providing a guy that seemingly is always open for LaNorris Sellers, which I think is a big deal in the South Carolina passing attack. I think it was solid on offense. You still got to fix it. You still have to get better. But I thought what you saw from LaNorris Sellers, what you saw at times from the offensive line, it was encouraging. And now you got a bye week to build off it. And it's a heck of a lot easier to build off some performances after a win than it is with a loss. Defensive side of the football, I'll give one monster shout out. They had some real problems losing leverage on that first drive. It was actually pretty damn bad. And then all of a sudden they fixed it, right? And that you got to give a lot of credit to the coaching staff. And I know there's been a lot of heat towards the coaching staff. And look, rightfully so. I don't think this is a particularly well-coached team through the first 5 weeks of the season. You saw them fix a lot of problems that they had some very big problems the first 2 drives of this football game, specifically that first drive, especially with the leverage stuff. You fixed it. I thought this defense was swarming. The performance that we saw from the South Carolina defense Saturday night against Kentucky kind of reminded you of what we saw from this unit last year. We're creating a lot of negative plays. We're creating turnovers. That's a really important part in terms of what South Carolina wants to do. They're going to be aggressive, right? You were capitalizing. You were finishing on your pass rushes. When you had the opportunities to go make plays and force turnovers, South Carolina was doing that. Dylan Stewart and Dylan Stewart has not been bad, by the way. I don't know if he's had the impact that he probably wants to have on football games through the first month of the season, but he hasn't been bad. He was really, really damn good Saturday night against Kentucky. And how I'll say this, Brian Thomas, I continue still at times want to see him be better against the run, but golly, he can rip it up as a pass rusher. And that is a formidable pass rush duo. And again, sneak peek to what we're going to see in 2 weeks against LSU. If LSU can't run the football and they're going to drop back and throw the football against those 2 edge rushers with Garrett Nussmeier, who's clearly not right, you like South Carolina's chances to go on the road and give LSU's offense a lot of problems and maybe force some turnovers because, look, Garrett Nussmeier's been loose with the football. Thought Brandon Cisse was really good. How about this? Not only creating a ton of negative plays and creating some turnovers, you also didn't really give up a lot of explosives. You gave up one play that went for over 25 yards. That was on that 3rd and 2 second drive of the game. They kind of leaked that tight end on a little bit of a wheel route. Nobody picked him up. They popped one for 50. Outside of that, you didn't have a single play that went for over 25 yards. When you can create the negative plays that South Carolina does, and then at the same time not give up explosives, that's a good combination of having a really formidable defense. And we think this, hey, if there's one thing we have learned, this South Carolina defense is better than I would have thought it was going to be going into the 2025 year. Like outside of that game against Missouri and maybe at times against Vanderbilt, although I would argue that the problems against Vanderbilt had more to do with the offense. This defense, you can win games with this defense. We just need this offense to be the offense that we thought they were going to be going into 2025. Look, it's not perfect. And that my intention is not to get up here and say that South Carolina looks like a college football playoff team because they don't right now. You started to see the flashes, probably the most amount of flashes in a football game that we've seen all year for South Carolina. Now you got 2 weeks, right? You got a bye week next weekend, 2 weeks to get healthy, 2 weeks to continue to get better as a football team. Because look, there are still some young players on both sides of the football for South Carolina. There are ways we think this team can get better. And that's an important conversation because there's a difference, right? I'm a Michigan fan. Many of y'all know that. Michigan was brutal on offense last year, but there was no way it was going to get better. You just didn't have the dudes at wide receiver. You didn't have a quarterback you could trust. We kind of knew the offense was going to suck all year. But for South Carolina, there are reasons to believe this team can get better as the season goes on, just like we had last year. Now you got to go get better. And if you can go get better, you're going to give teams a heck of a lot of problems all the way through. And if you can be perfect, you can still have that conversation. I don't even think we should be having the playoff conversation yet. We should just be focused on getting better as a football team And as we get into late October, November, look up and say, hey, what's the roadmap looking like? The SEC, it's gettable. Like there are not a lot of teams that are unbeatable. And hey, I'll say this: South Carolina has the chance to beat every team on their schedule. They ain't no doubt about it. Am I picking them to win every single game? No, but they gonna have a chance to win every single game on their schedule. Close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.